A guten Erev Shabbos, and thanks for watching. On Tisha B'Av, 528 years ago, a little boy, he was 4 years old, his name was Yosef ben Ephraim, was forced to leave his home in Toledo, Spain, along with the entire Jewish community of that country. This little boy would later be known as Rabbi Yosef Karo, author of Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law that we still look to today. Rabbi Yosef is known by several nicknames that refer to his scholarship. We call him the Mechaber, the author, capital T, capital A, the author, meaning author of Shulchan Aruch. In the Sephardic world, he's called Maran, our teacher, and he's also known by another work of his, Beit Yosef, Beis Yosef, the House of Joseph, which is a lengthy commentary on the Torah, Arba Turim, an earlier codification of Jewish law. Rabbi Yosef Karo had a hard life in some respects. After the expulsion from Spain in 1492, his family settled elsewhere, in Portugal, until Portugal expelled its Jews 6 years later. He lived for a time in different cities in the Ottoman Empire, Nicopolis, Adrianople, Istanbul. In the early 1530s, he lived with his wife and their 3 children in Salonika, when a pandemic hit the community there and claimed the lives of all of his family. Rabbi Yosef got remarried and settled in Tzfat in Israel. While he was working on his magnum opus, the Shulchan Aruch, his wife had a baby boy whom they named Shlomo. When Shlomo was 15, his father started to look for a shidduch for him. Rabbi Yosef Karo was in his 80s by this time and obviously wanted to see his son married. He was a widely respected scholar by this point in his life and was looking for a suitable rabbinic family for his son to marry into. There was this family who had just arrived in Tzfat from Egypt, and they had a daughter of marriageable age. The newly arrived family was headed by a young scholar who had something of an eccentric reputation, but he was known as a tremendous Talmid Chacham nonetheless. His father came from Europe, so they called him the Ashkenazi. Rabbi Isaac Luria was his name. They called him the Ari, initials for Ha'ashkenazi Rabbi Yitzchak. He was a scholar of the inner dimension of Torah, the mystical, the Kabbalistic, and he had tremendous reverence for the Mechaber, who was also head of the Beit Din in Tzfat. This respect was mutual, and the shidduch was made between their 2 children. In fact, they admired one another so much that they made a chavrusa. They decided to learn together. This was interesting and noteworthy on at least 2 accounts. One is that there was some 40-year age difference between these 2 future mechatanim. The other was that their fields of expertise were quite divergent. Nevertheless, they sat down to learn together. After all, who can't learn something from someone else, especially a great scholar? What happened was when the Ari, the younger of the 2, would begin explaining an idea according to the insights of Kabbalah, the older, Rabbi Yosef Karo, would doze off. The Ari told his mechitin, you see, your neshama is just not a vessel for this level of study. It would be better if you studied the writings of the Ramak, Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, who just recently passed away in their community. As it turned out, it seems that perhaps that generation itself was also not quite a vessel for the Ari's teachings, because he himself passed away not long after, at the age of 38, just a few years after the wedding took place. Rabbi Yitzchak Luria's Yortzeit is the 5th of Av, which is Sunday. His mechitin, Rabbi Yosef Karo, lived a few years after him. It would be surprising to find someone in his 80s, particularly a great Torah scholar, willing to learn from someone in his 30s, no matter what the reputation. But such was the humility of Rabbi Yosef Karo, such was his desire to learn. And that's actually a tremendous inspiration for us as we stand at the beginning of Chumash Devarim, Parshas Devarim, the first Parsha in the 5th book of the Chumash, Deuteronomy. It's known colloquially as Mishnah Torah, the repetition of the Torah, but don't confuse that nickname with the official name of the Rambam's Code of Jewish Law, the same name. The name Deuteronomy, check me on the Greek, is a second law, or more properly, a repetition of the law. Moshe Rabbeinu took the last 5 weeks of his life, the last 37 days from Rosh Chodesh Shvat until Zayin Iyar, the 7th of Adar, his 120th birthday, to teach and review and to inspire us as we prepared for our entrance into the land of Israel. Shabbos Devarim is Moshe's speech. It's a holy book, but it's not God telling Moshe what to write, as it were, like it was with the first 4 books. This one is filtered through Moshe's mind. It's what he felt was important for us to know and review in preparation for our next phase of life as a nation, entering into Israel. Things were going to be different from here on in. Instead of lechem min hashamayim, manna from heaven, we would have to plant and harvest and grind and knead and bake our own bread. That's a pretty big change. You know, in these last few weeks of pandemic lockdown, few months rather, of lockdown, the entire Western world discovered the pleasures of home-baked bread once again. That's why you couldn't find any yeast in the grocery store there for a couple of months. I saw an article this week that explained that when the lawyer who charges $400 an hour for his time stays home to bake bread, that loaf of bread is now worth $800 in our economy. And it's not even necessarily that good. So this article said, time to let the bakers get back to baking, doing what they do best, and the lawyers get back to doing what they do, and hopefully the economy will recover before too long. Anyway, life for the Jewish people was going to be quite different. Not only would we have the responsibility and the privilege to work and protect and care for the land of Israel, we would also now be a generation of people for whom living memory no longer included the exodus from Egypt and the revelation at Sinai. It's like in our generation. Those who survived the Holocaust are fewer in number among us each year. While we have all, probably most of us, seen numbers tattooed on arms, our grandchildren probably won't see that, or it won't be in their, in other words, it won't be in their living memory. This moment in Jewish history is definitely a transitional moment. This moment then was an important moment. I wonder if they looked at it as a crisis. Here's the great leader of Bnei Yisrael, knowing that his life is moving towards its close. What would they do without Moshe Rabbeinu? Or maybe, on the other hand, they said, you know, Moshe's really a leader from another time. Remember, the generation that went into Israel was not the same one that left Egypt 40 years before, except for Yehoshua and Kalev. All the older generation had moved on. They'd passed away. And it was their children who were going to go in and settle the land of Israel. Maybe they said, let's give him the respect that he deserves, you know, been around for a long time. Let's listen. We'll try to stay awake for the next 5 weeks during this drasha. But just as well, a new leader for new times. Who knows what people felt in their hearts? But we know this for sure. Moshe's message from the beginning of Devarim, from the beginning of Deuteronomy, all throughout, is learn and review. And then learn some more, and then review some more. In his review of the Torah, Moshe repeats the 10 Commandments, the standing at Sinai, standing together at Sinai. There are some mitzvot that we learn about only from Moshe's retelling of them here in this book. The mitzvah to write a Sefer Torah for ourselves, the mitzvah to appoint a king, many of the laws of warfare that unfortunately would remain relevant for a long time, even up to our times, like the prohibition of causing wanton destruction, especially of the environment, especially fruit-bearing trees, even in wartime, and so on. What do we take away from Parshas Devarim, though, and from the whole of Chumash Devarim? This message of Moshe's, learn and review, and then learn some more, and then review some more. That's what Moshe Rabbeinu's message really is to us and to all generations. Keep learning. Stay engaged with the great wisdom and the great questions the Torah places before us. We're also in a time of transition, maybe even a crisis. It's too soon to tell. What's happening in our world is affected by COVID, but really it brings to the fore a lot of challenges that were there for a long time. We just didn't want to talk about them. There's greater division among Jews, sadly. There's more financial pressure. There's a growing divide between Israel and many parts of the diaspora communities. Things are going to change in many ways, and Zoom meetings are just the tip of the iceberg. In our own Kehillah, we're also at a bit of a tense moment. From Tisha B'Av this week, we're 7 weeks away from the high holidays, which all of us look forward to all year, each in our own way. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are special times at Kehillah Sharei Torah, with seeing friends, with our beloved Chazanim and our choir, and the company and good feeling of having everyone davening together, experiencing the moment together. Well, a part of the high holidays is going to be in exile, temporarily. We're definitely going to have high holiday services in Shul this year. We're definitely going to have our Chazanim. We've been in touch in recent days, and we're looking forward to their continued leadership of our prayer service. At the same time, not everyone is going to be ready to be in Shul, and with good reason, and with good basis in Jewish law, that Shulchan Aruch that we talked about before. A person does not have the right to endanger his or her own health and well-being, even for a mitzvah. Given the uncertainty of the pandemic situation, not all of us feel completely comfortable being in Shul, even for such a special day as Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur. That's the right feeling to have, and we do not want anyone to feel any pressure to attend when they have any doubts about their own health and safety. So while we will have services here in Shul, we will be completing and communicating to you in days to come our plan for how the entire high holiday services season, including services, will look this year, and hopefully only this year. I'm full of hope that next year, may we all live and be well, next year this time we'll be getting ready to be back in Shul just as it was, all of us together for a full service with all the trimmings, with the choir, with our whole kehillah in good health. Put that on your calendar. Rosh Hashanah 5782 begins Monday night, September 6th, 2021. Yes, that's Labor Day. Maybe we'll just have the barbecue and roll right into Rosh Hashanah services. We'll see if Rabbi Beshevkin's ready to give his talks in the bouncy castle. By that time, Mervel and der Leben will all be healthy and safe, and this pandemic will be nothing more than a bad memory. This year, we still have to take extra precautions. We will have socially distant seating, which means fewer of us in the sanctuary. So we're preparing the Davidson Social Hall, and if needed, the tent in the parking lot to accommodate everyone who wants to be here in person. Though it pains me to say, we're going to have to make do without our wonderful choir this year, because what the experts tell us is that choirs singing together is, unfortunately, a very fertile ground for transmission and infection, and we want to avoid that possibility at all costs. So we're going to have to manage without the beautiful and uplifting sounds of the choir. We're going to leave out some of the piyutim, some of the additional poems that are in the Chazan's repetition of davening that make the prayers so memorable and so beautiful, but that also make them longer. We want to minimize our time in Shul. That's probably what many people have been davening for years already, right? And we're going to have to comply with provincial regulations about wearing masks indoors. So since nobody wants to sit with a mask inside for a very long time, hours upon hours, we're going to do our best to keep the services much briefer than in years past. The drushes will all be online in advance of Yom Tif to save time for in the shul. We're planning on having a whole program of videos online for you to help prepare yourself for Elul and for the high holidays, whether you plan to be in shul in person or if you prefer to daven at home. We hope that these opportunities in weeks to come will call upon Moshe Rabbeinu's advice to us in this week's Parsha, in this Chumash. Learn and review, and then learn some more and review some more. What we're all called upon to do is just that, learn and review. Thanks to the generosity of some of our members, we were able to distribute sets of Koren Machzorim a few years back to every KST family at the time. The introductions in these Machzorim by Rabbi Sachs are gold, solid gold. So let's begin reading those, or reviewing them if you've read them already. They're a treasure trove. Since some of us will be davening at home, and some of us will be davening in shul, but we won't have the chazanim or the choir lead us in all the special prayers that are added in for the holidays, it's important for all of us to review the prayers ahead of time, to be familiar and comfortable with them. So when the time comes to daven, we'll be prepared. When the Torah speaks about conquering the land and settling the land, that applies to all of us, certainly those who live in the land of Israel, and even they, whether they realize it or not, are obligated to participate in conquest and settling the land within ourselves, as described in the writings of Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, the Ari, about whom we spoke at the outset. Conquering the land and settling the land are also about striving for mastery and contentment of our own emotions, and our own minds, our own feelings, and our own neshamas. Part of that striving is the 613 mitzvahs. Part of that striving is the service of prayer and memory on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Part of that is mourning and remembrance on Tisha B'Av. And part of that is looking forward with hope and optimism to better days to come. And all of that, of course, is based on Moshe's imploring us in every verse of Shabbos Devarim, learn and review, and then learn some more and review some more. May these days of sadness in the beginning of the month of Av be transformed into contentment and gladness in the weeks to come, as we'll say in the Slichas, Karachem Av al Banim. May God have Rahmanas, mercy on His creation, like an Av, like a father has for his children. May we look forward to ever better times ahead in joy and in good health and peace for ourselves, our Kehillah, and Klal Yisrael. Good Shabbos.